Thank you, Nick. Yeah, whole scale change, large group interventions as a whole, as a category of activities, which includes whole scale, real-time strategic change, future search, right? Search, future search, and all of these methodologies, I think, came about as a consequence of two important questions, right, that we were pursuing back 20, 30 years ago. The first was, why do the few have to decide for the many? Why can't the many decide for themselves? Right? And most of us were used to working with small groups. We all came from a small group dynamic perspective and training. And so this question of how could the many decide for themselves? Right? Could you not replicate what you do in a small group in a bigger context? And that was the first question. The second question was actually posed by a client of mine who said, we're being asked to reduce our cycle time. Right? We're being asked to produce products in half the time, right, and get them to market in half the time. Why is it that change has to take so long? Why can't we move faster, right? Why does it have to take 2 or 3 years to create transformation? And I thought, it was an arbitrary sort of notion when somebody would say, well, how long is it going to take? We'd say 2 or 3 years, right? Not because there was scientific proof or evidence of it, but because we didn't really know any better, right? And so this question of how did the many decide for themselves? And then, of course, if you engage a lot of people, how do you move fast? I mean, that seems like it would slow things down, right? And so large group interventions and whole-scale change in particular came about as a consequence of trying to answer those two questions, right? And the term whole scale is really, it's whole hyphen scale. And the whole is whole system. How do you engage the whole system, a constellation of stakeholders, et cetera, in the conversation about whatever needs to change, whether it's strategy, structure, or whatever, right? And the scale is, sometimes it's big, right? Everybody was enamored with large, right? Hundreds of people, but oftentimes the scale is small, right? We don't always have the ability to bring hundreds of people together, whether it's virtually or face-to-face. So the whole is whole system, always, and the scale is large or small, right? And how do you manage that? That's really the context within which I think we had the conversation, right? Why do the few have to decide for the many? Why can't they decide for themselves? What might that look like, and how might we do it? And that's the genesis of whole scale.
And what about was that for? Because when you read the books, the whole scale change and large group interventions have been around for many years. Am I right in remembering whole scale change itself is initially formed back out in the 1980s?
Yes. In the 80s, if you go back that far, there were forums and conversations among practitioners from across the range of org design and org development about this whole question of, how do we engage people? How do we reimagine how we do this? Underlying it all is ownership and commitment. How do we build ownership and commitment on the part of people? And so whatever methodology you look at, open space, future search, real-time strategic change, whole-scale change, they're all about building ownership and commitment, right? And engaging people in whatever the relevant conversations are. And so there was a lot of comparisons, right? There was a lot of collaboration amongst us because we were all experimenting, and the genesis of whole scale really comes from, Robert Jacobs wrote a book called Real-Time Strategic Change. And mostly the application that Kathy Dannemiller, my old partner, had been used to is strategy deployment from her work at Ford Motor. So the real-time strategic was about how do you deploy strategy in a way that creates execution faster, right? Yeah. But strategy is only one challenge. Structures, processes, people issues, all these other things are also. And so full scale comes out of the exploration of how else could we apply it and what else could we work on that would be relevant, and then how would we do that, right? So in any whole scale event, you might find some elements of future search, some elements of open space, some elements of RTSC, right? It's, you know, because it was a collaboration, it was an exploration on the part of all of us.
Yeah, yeah. Just to kind of flip to Alistair and just ask him about his experience and the Tricordant experience of using LGIs and whole scale change. I don't think we could say that we're purists in the way that we apply these things, but you know, Alistair, your thoughts and your experiences?
In today's context, which has those questions still resound. Why should the few decide for the many? How can we reduce cycle times? I think that latter question is even more acute now with the pace required in the current world, where the level of complexity, ambiguity, change feels like it's even greater. And I guess the other issue that I think LGIs particularly bring us to is tackling wicked issues, polarities, the kind of tensions that are at the heart of a lot of what, you know, organizations are struggling with. So whether it's in org design, org development, we use, as you say, blended LGIs a lot in our work in Tricordant. We've been trained in a number, formally trained in a number of different processes usually by the people who originated these processes, whether it's Sandra Janoff and Future Search or Jake Jacobs with RTSC, etc. But I think it is all about how to create that sense of support people with sense making on a collective level, and build that sense of commitment for change, because, you know, the underlying principle, as we all know, is people support what they help to create. Now, the interesting questions to me are finding clients who are willing to support that, given the challenge it can have on the power dynamics and within organizations. But we found it's a really powerful and effective approach, and I couldn't imagine us doing without it. And I think I'm really excited that our team, together with the folks who are going to come and join us with Paul, are going to learn even more around whole scale change and the insights that brings as well.